I never knew what could be told about my great-grandparents, at least until I was sitting on the couch one day with my mother looking at old photo albums. I came across photos of my young mother, of course, and photos of her side of the family from my grandparents, my aunt, my uncle, and my grandparents' parents. It felt truthfully nostalgic in wake of my grandfather's passing this mid-March of 2020. My mom's side of the family is ridiculously spread out now compared to prior years. I could probably count on my hands how many times I've seen my grandparents, as well as my uncle and aunt, simply because, well, $600 to $800 worth of plane tickets a year just wasn't our fortune. My mom's side has lived out in San Diego, California since before I was born. In fact, since my mother had entered University of Rhode Island for her undergraduate. So, granted, there's been a bit of disconnect on my father's side that I've been able to at least piece together over the years since I've gotten to hear all of the stories. My mother's side, well, not so in depth. So out of curiosity piques my question. Mom, what about Grandma and Grandpa? And what about my great-grandma and Grandpa? The story begins here in Austria, but it doesn't end here. Austria is probably unfamiliar to most as it's located in the southern region of Central Europe. This is where Morris Pugach was born, my maternal great-grandfather, in the year 1909. Where religion is common in my family today, religion was like a necessity in his growing up. At age 3, from what he described, he was immediately immersed into a very conservative or arguably an Orthodox Jewish background. He attended what was called yeshiva, which is just a term for a Jewish Orthodox institution of learning. He spent time in his studies here where he read and studied the Talmud, which is just a religious text for Jews that comprises of both an oral Torah and its teachings. At this time, Morris's father, Joseph, was already in America and had earned and saved enough money over the course of 7 years with the ambitions of moving Morris, Sophie, his mother, Sylvia, his sister, and his brother Eddie into the United States of America for a promising life. It was not uncommon in history for many Jews to migrate out of Europe. This stemmed from a law that had passed in 1827 in the region of Eastern Europe that Jews were required to serve in the military for at least 25 years. This was done with intention for Jews to essentially become assimilated into Russian culture and in turn a conversion into Christianity. I can only imagine how different my family narrative would be if my great-grandfather never immigrated into the States. In 1892, most immigrants had entered the United States through New York Harbor, but other port entries included Boston, Baltimore, San Francisco, New Orleans, and Philadelphia, which is where Morris Pugach had settled with his family after immigrating into the United States. With good health and correctly ordered papers, the inspection to get into Ellis Island and through took about 3 to 5 hours in the registry room, which is where doctors would conduct what was referred to 6-second physicals, often identifying numerous medical conditions by simply glancing at them. Looking back, this doesn't seem too particularly effective. Interpreters of all major languages were employed at Ellis Island, and that made the process very efficient and accurate. In fact, only 2% of arriving immigrants were excluded from entry, either for disease concerns or concerns of the likelihood of any kind of illegal contract labor. In 1907, this was proved to be Ellis Island's busiest year. Over 1.25 million immigrants passed and were processed. By the time November of 1954 rolled around, this was the last remaining detainee on Ellis Island to arrive and was released, and the United States government had officially closed Ellis Island this year.
Yeah, and my mother was born in the United States. Yeah, in Philadelphia.
Sophie Pugach, originally Sophie Soifer, was born in 1911 in America, actually, unlike Morris, particularly Philadelphia. Her family was pretty strictly conservative in terms of Judaism, yet unlike Morris, she was a little more well-off. Her father, Max Soifer, was a dress manufacturer, and he had a business with his 2 brothers. So he was pretty much the disciplinary in this family dynamic and observed the high holy days and observed Shabbat, which is Judaism's day of rest. In terms of first occupations, Sophie's was a ladies' hat store, and often women bought very luxurious hats at this time to wear for many events at the synagogue for high holy days. Her second job was called Lit Brothers Department Store, and she made about $15 a week as a sales girl. She also worked for her Aunt Sarah's dress shop for 13 years and had both a public education and Hebrew education. She documents herself voting for the first time at 21 and could speak French, English, and Yiddish. Before the Depression, her father Max and brothers expanded their business, opening up a factory in New York, but the Depression resulted in the loss of just about everything, causing a move back to Philadelphia. Her mother, Sarah Soifer, passed at age 60, and Max had remarried. She was a member of Sisterhood of Our Temple and attended many meetings at Adath Zion, our temple that her and Morris attended, also where Phyllis had gotten married. I was able to interview my grandmother Phyllis, who was born in 1941 in Philadelphia, which was Morris and Sophie's first child. You were super close with them?
I was super close? No. I was closer to my mother's family.
Your mother's family?
Mm-hmm. But I respected them, you know.
Reflecting on my grandparents' and great-grandparents' lifestyles, it all connects to the bigger picture in my life and how elements of historical knowledge and culture really trickle down. Tracing the roots of my great-grandparents not only was eye-opening, but also enhances my own personal narrative of my Jewish heritage and upbringing. One interesting thing that I had to think about upon doing this research was when I had asked my grandmother Phyllis in an interview about her religious experiences as my mother had me get bat mitzvahed. She had told me that she had not gotten bat mitzvahed because back then it was fairly uncommon and not normal for a lot of women to get bat mitzvahed. It was mainly only something that traditionally men would do, which was referred to a bar mitzvah, which is why often you hear more selectively the term bar mitzvah instead of bat. Bar is boy and bat is girl.
Chose to raise my children Reform because I grew up, for the most part, Reform. My mom would definitely try to have no products of a pig in the house, and she would be very strict about Passover. And my father was Reform, and whereas her parents were more religious. So when I married your dad, he was non-Jewish, and so it was agreed upon that you'd be raised Jewish, but it would be Reform, and we would kind of incorporate both holidays kind of together. I had all three of you given a Hebrew name, so I made sure that you were brought in the temple and given a Hebrew name, each one of you. So that was like really something important for me to do. And then I was very happy that I had the opportunity to get two of you bat mitzvahed. So, although I didn't raise you, like we didn't go to temple that often, we would go to high holidays, I felt it was an important piece of your identity, of you knowing that part of you and that history and where you come from.
Learning more about my great-grandparents' lifestyles and cultural background definitely filled in many gaps that I had about my own personal relationship with religion and how that's been presented in my life through my mother. I almost wonder, learning about these narratives, how different the narrative would become if this wasn't the story told. As I had mentioned prior, I wonder how different my life could have truly been if Morris had not immigrated into the United States and met Sophie.